Hi, my name is Blake Masters. I am a writer and television showrunner. I created the show Brotherhood, which ran for 3 seasons on Showtime in the United States. I developed Law & Order LA under the sort of grand Law & Order banner for NBC Universal. Other shows I've worked on, Crossbones, which was a European co-production, and I recently did a season as a consulting producer on a half-hour comedy for Starz called Survivor's Remorse. My latest project is a new series, hopefully for USA Networks, called Falling Water, that we shot the pilot of last summer, and we are waiting to hear if we're going to go to series.
Talk to us a little bit about Falling Water. It's quite an interesting project. How do you go about sort of securing a pitch, and then sort of the process by which you actually entice them to offer you the pilot?
Falling Water was a very unusual project. Basically, it was unpitchable. The central premise being that people are being guided by information in their dreams to quest for these missing people in their lives. It was complex and mythological and character-driven in a way that was not high concept. It wasn't simple, boiled down to a sentence. So when Henry Bromell and I first came up with the idea many years ago, we decided to write it on spec. But before we even wrote it on spec, we actually sat down and broke rough outlines for the first 4 episodes to make sure that the idea was sustainable in series. We then sat down and wrote the pilot and weren't quite sure what we had in our hands, and so we shelved it because we were still doing Brotherhood at the time. And then I went to go do Law & Order, and he did Rubicon, and then he did Homeland, and we eventually got back around to it. And just when we sort of figured out how to put all the pieces together, he tragically passed away. And so I sat on the idea for a year and then did the last rewrite. At that point, Galen Hurd came on board to help me as a producer on it. Somebody who could wrangle some of the problems we'd given it was such a far out there idea. We decided the best way to approach it was, because it was such a cinematic pilot, that we wanted to get a director attached, somebody with a real clear vision. And we ended up meeting with and very much liking the work of Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, who had done Intacto and 28 Weeks Later and some other things. He then put together a packet of visual images so people could get a sense of what it would look like and what it would feel like, because when you're talking about dreams, people all have their own ideas, and we wanted to be very clear in the minds of buyers what they were buying. I then prepared, side by side with the pilot script, a document that broke down the underlying mythology and the potentiality of where the show would go in the first season and over the long-term arc. So we put together a package of the script and Juan Carlos's images, and it wasn't quite a Bible document. It was looser than that, but more of this is what the show really is and what you're buying. And then we pitched that to networks, and USA Network, which is in the middle of trying to transition what it is in the minds of people, was very excited and bought it, and within 3 months greenlit it to pilot with pretty much no work on the script. The advantage we had is we had an existing script, so they knew what the script was, and they had a sense of what the look was, and they knew who would be shooting it, and so there was a degree of faith in our idea of cinema, and we also caught them at the right moment. They had shot Mr. Robot but hadn't aired it. They had very, very high hopes for it. They thought, this is the new template of where we want to go, away from our traditional lighter Blue Skies fare in the sort of Royal Pains psych Burn Notice way. They wanted to do things that were a little more cinematic, a little more challenging, to try to go after some of the same audience that traditionally in the United States has been tuning into Showtime and FX and AMC, and to try to attack that audience, because it's a younger audience, but it's also a stickier audience, meaning they make more noise socially, and they're therefore a more valuable audience to advertisers, and they're also a more passionate audience. One of the things I think they found is that with their shows, they had very, very high audience numbers, but they weren't a particularly passionate audience, meaning USA didn't have the highest leverage on carriage fees. And therefore they wanted to create really buzzy shows where the audience was super passionate and would then convert their friends to it. And I think Mr. Robot is an example of how they really have changed their profile.
As you say, Mr. Robot and Falling Water, by the sounds of it, they're very interesting, perhaps niche subjects in one way. How do you go about creating a vision in your mind and then engaging enough viewers to make it a viable commercial opportunity?
I don't think about it. I just go, that seems cool. I'd like to spend 5 years doing that. I don't really worry that much about it. I figure that if I create something good enough, it will find an audience. I have written things which I think are very, very good, but I realized when I was done that they didn't, the phrase I always use is they didn't demand a place at the table. There's a pilot I wrote at one point, which I thought was a very, very well-written pilot, and I still think it's a very well-written pilot, but there was nothing about it that demanded that it get made. It wasn't sparklingly original. It wasn't different. I mean, it was just a really, really well-executed piece of drama. And I think in the American landscape right now, the specificity of something like Mr. Robot or Falling Water or The Americans or Mad Men or Homeland, there was something in the moment when they all made it through the system to air that demanded its place at the table. It was new. It was revelatory. To go back to the beginning of my career, Brotherhood, I was very blessed in that I managed to get something through the system before I knew what I was doing. And it was a really, really well-crafted, well-written show that I got through the system because I got to Showtime right as they were trying to, again, change their profile and compete with HBO. And we were a quality prestige drama with sort of a similar set of roots as The Wire and Sopranos. And so as a result, that's how we got on the air. The downside is, I think, despite how good we were, we never quite got as much attention as those other shows because, well, they were first and they were a little better. And so one of the things I've always felt is you can create a really wonderful show, but unless you're doing something, unless you're pushing the boundary, unless you're trying to do something that people haven't seen before, it's a crapshoot whether you get on the air. You know, you have to demand your place at the table. You have to be pushing it to do something new. And that's kind of the way I approach it. And sometimes you can do stuff that the audience doesn't connect with. But you can't predict that. I will always say David Chase is the best writer in the history of television. He wrote The Rockford Files, almost all of it, when he was like 19. And everybody who worked with David knew he was the best writer they'd ever met, but he'd never created a hit. He created one show that got on the air in 20 some odd years, and then he created Sopranos. So there's a degree to which luck and timing have a lot to do with it. David wasn't any better writer when he wrote Sopranos. He'd actually been writing mob pilots for years. It was that writer in that moment on HBO with Chris Albrecht in charge saying, David, I trust you, you're smart. What the heck, nobody's watching. I mean, literally nobody was watching. And go. And yet, I would say that if the Larry Sanders Show hadn't been on HBO, and critics hadn't saying, the best show on TV is this Larry Sanders Show on HBO that nobody's watching. Larry Sanders was John the Baptist for a 1-2 punch of Sex and the City and Sopranos, which made HBO must-watch television. Without Larry Sanders, without that 1-2 punch, there is no, it's not TV, it's HBO, there is no Sopranos. If you release Sopranos today, the exact same episodes, as a brand new show on whatever channel you wanted to, the show would be just as good. But it would not catch that lightning in the bottle quality. And that's the thing you can't control as a writer, as a show creator. Hell, Law & Order ran for 20 years. It almost got canceled after seasons 1, 2, and 3. I mean, it's, I don't know, Dick Wolf must be worth, $750 million at this point? It's been translated into Japanese. I mean, Law & Order is playing 24 hours a day somewhere in some form, everywhere, forever. And it almost got canceled 3 times.
There's more drama than ever before, especially in the US. Some comments over the summer from John Landgraf and others suggested perhaps that we're at a critical mass moment. What's your opinion as a creative? Do you think that moment's coming?
Everything is cyclical. Creators like me will create as much drama as we're allowed to. We want as many shots at the apple to get our stuff on the air because we're architects and it only works if our buildings get made. You can write a beautiful TV show. If it doesn't get on the air, it doesn't exist. So on the one hand, we'll take the 57 channels that are out there. I think what's happening right now is those 57 channels that are putting on drama shows at the moment are all fighting for the same cultural oxygen. And I think what people like John Landgraf are saying is there's a limited amount of cultural oxygen. And since all these shows are produced at a financial deficit, because all of these channels are trying to demand a place on your cable box as we go to an a la carte world, to demand that you want that over-the-top service, you want that over-the-top service with your bundle. Netflix is figuring out how do we supply programming if everybody pulls their license fee back and has their own over-the-top service. So I think that there is this shuffling right now of who are the players going to be 10 years from now. Everybody's now trying to make drama that has eyeball sticky, that you draw viewers to it, so the audience demands that channel as part of their menu. And that's the unsustainable part. It's not that there's not an appetite. There's a huge appetite for good television. The problem right now is good television is so scattered, we don't know where to find it. And I think what's going to happen is not that the audience is going to get tired, or the creators are going to get tired. I think that the financial model is going to be such that these shows, which are expensive to make, that you're going to have the stronger financial players are going to bully their way to the top because the audience isn't going to want to pay for 57 channels. And with the breakup of cable, you're going to have less. And if there are less, there's less airspace, there's less demand. I think the audience wants lots of drama. I think the audience wants specific drama, but I think that there are always going to be shows that appeal to huge, wide, shallow pools. This is the great Law & Order secret. Law & Order will appeal to anyone, anywhere, at any time, but it's not a particularly deep pool. Then you have shows like The Americans, which even in the US don't do very well, but the audience that watch it is convinced they're watching the best show on television and will kill somebody if they don't get another season. Now, if you want to get mathematical about it, you do passion times audience size, you get an area. And I would bet you that Law & Order and, say, Justified have this cover the same area. Justified has less viewers, but damn, they're passionate. And that's the trick to modern television. Because a passionate viewer will get on social media, a passionate viewer will watch the commercials, a passionate viewer will call the cable company and demand the channel as part of their package. A passionate viewer will pay for the over-the-top service. Because the dirty secret of American television is, unless you're an over-the-air network, 75% I think of your the money coming into the network is not advertising. It's carriage fees. It's over-the-top fees. So being able to negotiate leverage on that carriage fee number with the cable companies is the number one thing for networks.